Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. Is Israel heading to another war? Is Israel not going to be attacked, but is Israel going to launch into another war and expand this conflagration that's already roiling half of the Middle East? Is it going to get worse? Now, you would think, just on the surface of it, well, no one seeks war. No one's going to start another war when they're already in a huge one already. Are they? Well, to try to unravel this, we have with us show favorite Matthew Ho, former State Department official, former combat Marine, good friend of mine, just all around great guy, definite star of the show. Welcome back, Matt. Can't hear you there. Do we get some audio?
I know. I have muted myself.
There we go. Yeah, don't want to mute you, man.
Off mute.
We need to hear what you have to say, because you're the one that's going to help us make a lot of sense out of something that just doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense on the surface. But that does seem to be where things are heading right now. Now, obviously, there's so many things we could talk about in terms of the Middle East writ large, or even just the Israeli-Hamas war that's going on right now. But we want to take a look at the potential for this thing to expand, not by accident or miscalculation or anything else, but by design, into the north of Israel, into Lebanon against Hezbollah. Now, unless anybody thinks that this is hyperbole, yesterday we had politician Ben Gvir, who said that actually Israel should start a war against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon as a preemptive attack. I mean, we certainly got a lot of, that sounds very Bush-esque about, let's just prevent attack here. And of course, Matt, as I think you could talk to in a second here, a lot of people say that, well, we can't take care of Hamas here and then leave Hezbollah in the north. We have to take care of one and then take care of the other, or maybe try to do both simultaneously. I don't know. But also yesterday, a 3-star Israeli general said this.
רוצים להגיע בלבנון למטרה מאוד ברורה. זה להחזיר את התושבים לצפון, כל היישובים בצפון. אנחנו מבינים שהדבר הזה חייב לעבור דרך שינוי מאוד משמעותי. אני לא יודע מתי המלחמה בצפון. אני יודע להגיד לכם שהסבירות לזה שהיא קורית בחודשים הקרובים, וכשנצטרך אנחנו נלך קדימה בכל הכוח.
Now, I'm sure, Matt, they are not just saying this just to kind of, I don't know, make headlines. I mean, I think that they're trying to lay the foundation here so nobody's surprised when it comes. And also, just a few weeks ago, you had another member of Netanyahu's government that said that Israel should have to reoccupy southern Lebanon for another 50 years. So everywhere you look, all across their government, and that's the key thing here. This is not rumors. This is not what somebody said or what we're reading the tea leaves. These are statements by senior ranking government and military officials. Everything is pointing to Israel going into the north. What do you make of this, and what do you think would happen?
Well, this has been this is the example of a Pandora's box being opened. All sorts of things have come out of this. Some desired, some unwanted, some foreseen, some not foreseen. You take, for example, the 3-star general you just were showing the the quote from. He mentioned something that's very important. There's more than 100,000 Israelis who've been displaced from their communities in northern Israel. They're staying in hotels in Tel Aviv and in Haifa and other places. I mean, that's a tremendous impact on a society of 8 million people to have more than 100,000 people displaced. You also have the economic consequences of all this, whether it be the Houthi attacks on shipping in the Red Sea that have disrupted, shipping coming to Israel. Israel is very dependent upon shipping for a lot of different aspects of its economy and society, but also too, the call up of a few 100,000 reservists has caused, as you can imagine, again, a country of 8 million people, and you call up a large chunk of them into your reserves, that's going to have a big impact on your economy. People are missing from work, basically. You have the entire economy of northern Gaza of northern Israel and southern Israel shut down, basically, because of the genocide that Israel is choosing to conduct in Gaza, as well as what's occurring in northern Israel and with Lebanon. So just like that one aspect, if you just look on the economic side of this, the pressure that is on the Israeli government to do something to remedy the situation is massive. But that's just one aspect. And it doesn't have as much importance in terms of the decision making of many of the people at the top as the political decisions making. You showed comments there from, again, very important people in Israel, not just random folks, but very important people in senior government positions who are desirous of launching a war into Lebanon. There's the prime minister certainly can see the upshot of it, because he knows as soon as the war in Gaza is over, he's out of power. Israelis want him out of power, and very likely he could be going to prison because of all the corruption he engaged in. So he has
that trial is actually still ongoing. They restarted that not too long ago, so that's burning in the background and certainly a factor in Netanyahu.
And then you have this desire. You hear that last quote from Lieberman talking about how we should reoccupy Lebanon, which is, I think this is where, a lot of us are saying, what is going on here? This is madness to reoccupy. I mean, if people who aren't familiar with the occupation of Lebanon that Israel conducted from 1982 to, I think it was 2002, they pulled out. It was just a horror show for Israel. I mean, absolute horror show in so many ways for Lebanon, of course, and Lebanese people took a terrible, what befell them was awful from that. But for Israel itself, it was a disaster. I mean, nothing less significant than this is how Hezbollah was created, was because of Israel. I mean, so you have these prominent people saying we should do it again. Maybe this time we'll get it right, which is what you hear in the American foreign policy establishment, right? I mean, we certainly heard this, Danny, when you and I were arguing against escalating the war in Afghanistan. Well, we learned from Vietnam, we learned from Iraq, so this time we are definitely going to get it right in Afghanistan.
Yeah. I'm going to mention that again here in a second. But let me ask you this, though. So even in Netanyahu's best case scenario, if things worked out exactly the way he wanted, he's talking about there's going to have to be an extended Israeli occupation of Gaza as it is, and probably even more aggressive in the West Bank, which is 3 million, I believe, is the number of people who live in that area there, on top of potentially now setting up this case for doing the same thing in the southern part of Lebanon. I mean, you talked about how much challenge this is already causing with the Israeli economy because of the diversion of so many people from the workforce into the army. If you did an occupation force, you would need substantially more troops than you have now. How can Israel even sustain this long term? I mean, it seems to me they are setting the stage for their self-destruction.
Well, and the folly of it, the illogic of it, this is again, but you see where the Israeli military fails like the American military fails. There's just such hubris, the politics of who's running the organizations, how they get to the top, these generals, who they represent, who their benefactors are outside of the militaries, who's advancing their cause. I mean, it's just not a cadre of intelligent, objective analysts. It's people who have political desires, who have ideological beliefs, who have a religious zealotry that want to see some type of destiny fulfilled. But there's also you'll come across these. Well, we're going to go into Lebanon and we'll occupy Lebanon up into the Litani River and push Hezbollah out. That might be great if all Hezbollah had was Katyusha rockets that fired 15 miles or whatever, but they don't. I mean, how far do you have to go into Lebanon? How much of Lebanon do you have to occupy to make Haifa and Tel Aviv safe from Hezbollah rockets? You have to push almost
probably all of it. I mean,
exactly. Yeah, I mean, and so what will you get out of this? What kind of security? This idea, but there is so entrenched in this mindset among both the religious zealots in Israel and the ultra nationalists, the more secular security types, this buffer state. So whether it's a greater Israel or a buffer around Israel, what does that actually accomplish? What does it mean in practice? You're talking about the commitment it would put on Israel in terms of manpower, in terms of what percent of its economy, what percent of its government spending is now going to support this. What do you get out of it? But politics trumps all of this. And, you know, I mean,
Well, it
that's
can
the
trump
reality.
all of it
Politics trump
while
all
you're
of it.
making these kind of decisions. But if the consequences of these things for the population itself, now we're going to talk in a minute about the implication and the horrific consequences on the Palestinian population. I don't want to forget about that. But for the moment, just look at the Israeli population. I mean, these kind of policies are going to bankrupt their country and make them far more insecure than they were on 6th of October than they are now.
Absolutely, completely isolated, but from the rest of the world, except for the United States, which the Israelis who are in favor of these policies say that doesn't matter. All we need is the United States. As long as we have the United States and the world's reserve currency backing us, to hell with the rest of the world. And we could see that in their actions. We could see that basically the way they presented themselves at the International Court of Justice last Friday. Their arguments were not a legal argument. So it was like a public relations argument. They were reinforcing their message to their people as well as to their supporters with the U.S., giving justification for the continued support of Israel. But you're right, Danny. So you're talking about some kind of occupation in Gaza. The IDF and then Netanyahu himself just said it again a day or two ago. We will fight throughout 2024 in Gaza. So you're looking at you're looking at combat operations by the IDF in Gaza through the rest of the year. You have 3 million people in the West Bank. 300 some odd people have been killed since October 7th by Israeli security services and settlers. Settlers are evicting people from their homes, burning their olive tree groves, just trying to capture villages. So you're on the verge of a third intifada by the Palestinians in the West Bank. And the West Bank, of course, which is what the Zionists in Israel, those who are pushing these policies, call Judea and Samaria. That's their goal. You know, Gaza is important,
Matt, I'm sorry,
but not nearly as
interrupt
important
for a second?
as
Because I hear that term a lot, and I don't know if all of our viewers understand that. When you say an intifada, I know I hear a lot about the first intifada and the second intifada, and you're talking about a potential another one. What is an intifada as contrasted with whatever's going on right now?
Well, intifada translates as revolution. So that's what you're talking about. You're talking about a revolution. So in 1987, you have the first intifada, which many people will remember. The Palestinians out on the street actively, physically opposing the Israeli occupation. Becomes very violent. The violence throughout the 90s against the Israelis by the Palestinians, violence being done as a form of resistance against occupation, includes the suicide bombings. Right. So you have Israeli civilians taking very horrific casualties in these awful suicide bombings, again, done as an act of resistance against the occupation. Israel's response, of course, was very, very heavy handed, very brutal. You have the second intifada in 2000. Which
led to the rise of Hamas.
Well, Hamas comes in 1987. So Hamas, excuse me, Hamas. Well, the origins of Hamas go before that.
They do that, but they got elected in 2005 as a result of that, right?
Right. So one of the things that Israel does is that up until that point, 2005, Israel since 1967 has been physically occupying Gaza. They've got army units there, and they have settlers, about 9,000 settlers, who controlled about 40% of Gaza's land. These 9,000 people. Including the best agricultural land, of course, the best spots on the coast, etc. So when Israel pulls out in 2005, it's this idea that we are taking some pressure off. We're not a visible presence in Gaza, as opposed to the West Bank, where they remained in full force. But what we'll do then now is we'll control Gaza, because it's not nearly as important to us as the West Bank. We will control Gaza by fire, basically. So we will have a air, land, and sea blockade on them. We will control everything going out. We built the infrastructure. We still control the infrastructure. So if they want any water, their water is coming from us. If they want to go fishing, they've got to get our approval. So the occupation still existed after Israel pulled out its troops and settlers, just to fight in a different form. So it went from being occupied in a traditional sense to what's referred to as an open air concentration camp. Basically.
I see. Yeah. Okay. Now I asked you about the potential third intifada, but I want to hold that for a second, because a couple things I want to discuss first, and then we'll get back to that. But the next thing I do want to talk about is, in light of all the stuff that we've talked about so far, man, you talk about some ideological or blinders in terms of policy making. Man, you can't look much further than Washington, D.C. Yesterday in Washington, our Secretary of State was on talking. Well, I'll let him speak for himself, and then we'll talk on the backside.
Unlike any time in the past, virtually all of its neighbors, its Arab neighbors, its Muslim neighbors, are prepared, indeed want to integrate Israel into the region. And they're prepared to give it the kind of security assurances and commitments and guarantees that they never would have given in the past. But they're equally committed to a pathway to a Palestinian state because they believe strongly, and we believe as well, that until that question is resolved, you're never really going to have peace and stability.
Sorry, that was actually in Davos, but it was yesterday. Let's get back to
I forgot that the World Economic Forum was going on. I was like, why are they interviewing him outside in Washington, D.C.?
I did, because it was snowing, and so it looked just like it. But
that's right. The WEF is going on.
Let's not get past the nuttiness of it. Him saying that, never before has the Middle East wanted to give Israel security concerns. And I'm thinking, are you serious? Since 10/7, you think it's better now than it was before that? I mean, that doesn't make any sense on any level, first of all. Yeah. But then the rest of it that he's talking about, that everybody is trying to get this done. We want to move past it. He's making it sound so simple and like, man, all they do to do, but there's a two-state. Now we actually have to do a two-state. And I think there's so much more to it than that, of course. But to me, Matt, you can't get into any of these genuinely hard issues when your mentality is, yeah, man, everybody wants to do what Israel wants to do. They embrace it.
I think this is similar to what we've seen with the American policy towards Ukraine, is that it's a strategy based on hope. So just obfuscate, delay, gaslight, lie, do whatever you can to stretch this out. And eventually it'll be over. And then we can spin it, right? You can spin it in a sense of, as they do. I mean, President Biden is going to be here in Raleigh today. I imagine if he gets asked about Gaza, which is unlikely unless protesters disrupt him, and so I hope they do, he will say how we're doing everything we can to make sure Israel's following the laws of war, how we are doing everything we can. We're being very forceful with them to get them out of Gaza as soon as possible. Just nonsense, just absolute nonsense. And that's how we need to treat this. I mean, we're dealing with psychopaths. I mean, if you can have these people who say things such as, we are doing everything we can to protect civilians in Gaza, to make sure that Israelis are following rules of war, all those sorts of things, while at the same time bypassing Congress to make sure they get bombs and shells as quickly as possible, sending like 3 C-17s a day of shells and missiles and munitions to a cargo ship every 2 or 3 days. These are psychopaths. I mean, and that's how we have to view them as. And this is why this is so dangerous, because they will say anything to just the worry for me, Danny, is how much of this is actually believed, how much of this is actually what they understand the world as. Do they really believe this? And that's then incredible.
Well, let me tell you, one of my concerns related to that is that even if we believed it, and let's just give them the benefit of the doubt for the moment and say that they actually mean those things, and that's what we want. And we are emphatically, as Kirby says often, we are telling the Israelis, they've got to do better at this, and they are doing better at minimizing civilian casualties. They're taking a robust intelligence direction toward these targeting so that they minimize all that kind of stuff. And then you have Netanyahu come out and say something like what I'm about to show you here, which is basically, y'all can all pound sand.
Yeah.
אנחנו מציינים היום 100 ימים למלחמה, 100 ימים ליום הנורא שבו נטבחו ונחטפו אזרחינו. אנחנו ממשיכים במלחמה עד הסוף, עד לניצחון המוחלט, עד שנשיג את כל יעדינו, חיסול החמאס, השבת כל חטופינו, והבטחה שעזה לעולם לא תהווה עוד איום על ישראל. אף אחד לא יעצור אותנו. לא האג, לא ציר הרשע, ולא אף אחד אחר.
Now, this is why I wanted to hold off on the discussion about the potential for a third intifada, because what Netanyahu is saying here sounds eerily similar to what Barack Obama said in December 2009 when he said, we are going to go into Afghanistan heavy so that Afghanistan can never again be used as a platform of terrorism against the United States, and we're going to destroy the Taliban. How did that work out about a decade later? And God only knows how many tens of thousands of casualties on both sides of that conflict, hundreds of thousands of Americans with PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, combat injuries, and it ended in with nothing. Now, that was, I think, about a 3 in comparison to the 9 in terms of violence and potential that we have in the Israeli situation here. And because here's my thing, and where I want you to go with this, what could come next? Netanyahu again there expressly said one of his objectives is the destruction of Hamas. Okay, let's say that miraculously they somehow do that. I don't think it's even possible to physically eliminate, but let's say that somehow they literally killed everybody that was Hamas. And all of that carnage that we keep seeing over and over on our daily television screens about this destruction of Hamas, of the civilian infrastructure there, and we're going to show something really disturbing here in a minute. But if there is, in fact, another intifada, in the definition you gave, which is they're going to rebel against you, what are the chances that after Hamas is gone, that the remainder of the surviving people don't do that?
About zero. About zero, right, Danny? I mean, like, what would you do? What would anyone watching do? What is history?
Just look at that imagery. That's everywhere in the Gaza Strip. Everything has been wiped out so that you can't sustain life. Now, even if Hamas is destroyed, where is all of the hundreds of, the millions of people who lived in those areas? What are they going to do? Live in a tent the rest of their lives and be passive? I mean, what are they thinking, man?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think what we're seeing here is a really driving effort to achieve a goal of Israeli policy for decades, right? This type of finish the Gaza problem. If we can ethnically cleanse the area, if we can push these 2.3 million people into Egypt, into the Sinai,
which Smotrich wants to do, for example.
Exactly. It's a lot of them. Exactly. Ben Gvir. I mean, the whole list of and if we can, this is the time to do it. We will never have a better chance than now to do it. I want to go back to what I was saying about Blinken, though, real quick, because, we can call them psychopaths, which there is that aspect to it. But there's also the hard realities of power here, the hard realities of our political system, and the way that the Israel lobby has its effect on American politics can't be dismissed, and it has to be considered as a prime factor in all this. Joe Biden knows that if he was to tell Netanyahu to stop this war, the Israel lobby would shift all its support to the Republican, quite possibly bring another candidate into the race through the No Labels campaign. And that would effectively, as far as the White House estimation is, lose the election for Joe Biden. I mean, and the same thing, too, you see with how the Israeli lobby, primarily AIPAC, is saying it's going to spend $100 million to defeat House candidates this cycle who have argued for a ceasefire. So this is very hard reality of our political system. This is the political system that people like Biden and Blinken exist in. This is their survival. And I think on the other aspect, hearing Netanyahu talk about these things, the way he looks at this is this type of war gives his government meaning. It certainly distracts, of course, from all the corruption and crime they were involved in, distracts, of course, from the judicial reforms they were trying to push through, which brought Israel's got about 8 million people, and a million of them were on the street, 6-7 months ago protesting against these judicial reforms. So this allows the government of Netanyahu to survive. And this is why, again, going back to Lebanon, the idea that if they can somehow sequence it and make it so Gaza's finished and now we can then begin Lebanon, that would be great for their survival. It extends everything. But I don't think that's possible to manage. I mean, we saw already where the Israelis pulled out a section of Gaza and Hamas fired rockets from it. So that's going to be the type of thing. And anytime the Israelis let up on their northern boundary with Hezbollah, Hezbollah is going to do something to pull the Israelis back because they want to help take pressure off of Gaza as much as possible without incurring some type of full-blown Israeli invasion. So they want this tit for tat thing in many ways. But yeah, I mean, what we're seeing here with the interests that are involved and what is best politically for the people who are making these decisions, what their own political survival stance, requires, what their political party's survival requires, what their institutions need, is driving so much of this. And it's almost, it's not as if they have a decision, because again, the political structure that they exist in, how they are surviving politically, is a construct that has long been built. So it's not just as if the White House woke up and, oh man, we have this Israeli lobby we've got to contend with. Oh, where did this come from? This has been constructed for decades. And so for decades, both Democrats and Republicans have loved taking that lobby money. But now in the see with the Biden administration, they have no choice. They have to support Israel to this.
Well,
there's also other ideologies.
Don't give him that much of an out. He has a choice.
He does have no
money. They can do the right thing. Because here's one of my overall driving issues with this, Matt, is that you have, and let's just look at some of the key actors here. You have the U.S. government, Blinken, Biden, Austin, several of these others. You have Netanyahu and Smotrich, Ben Gvir, and several of their co-religionists and people who have their ideological. They do. You have Iran. You have Hezbollah, the terrorists that are out there. Lots of violent people, and all of these people are like finding ways that they want to get their side in, and all of them are willing to use violence equally. In the middle, you have the vast majority of Israeli civilians who just want to live. You have the millions of Palestinians who just want to live. They don't want any damn war. They are sick and tired of all of this, and they want it to stop, and they have no power. I know that there's lots of Jewish people who are protesting to end these wars. They're not after this. There is others, of course, that are telling the government to go harder. That's the reason why a right-wing government was voted into power. So you have those dynamics. But the bottom line is that all of these forces are pursuing something that can't be obtained. Nobody is going to get peace. Not the Palestinians, not the Israelis, not the Houthis, not the Iranians. Nobody is going to have peace in there until somebody finally wakes up and says, all right, we're going to have to do something here. And I don't know. I mean, I can't even imagine in the current environment how that's going to happen, because I think, Matt, the chances are pretty high that the war does expand into Hezbollah in Lebanon. I think that there's a decent chance that Iran gets involved with this. And we haven't even talked about the issue in the Red Sea with the Houthis and all the stuff that could be going on with that, or Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, or some of the forces in Syria. You just see this as a powder keg. And I think, like you mentioned before we went on the air here, now that you got Iran into Pakistan and Pakistan back and forth, this whole thing is about to explode.
And every step, every decision that these different powers make limits future choices. So we saw this past week, of course, they could make the decision, as you were saying, Danny. They have the choice to end it. They have the choice to step back. They have the choice to de-escalate. But, escalation is a ladder, right? You got to either go up or down. You can't go side to side. And, so you saw this past week, the Israelis said, hey, we had a special operations team go into Lebanon and make a successful and do a successful mission. Well, what happens if the next time they do that, it's not successful, and 3 or 4 of their commandos don't come home? 3 or 4 of their commandos end up on a Hezbollah video. What are the Israelis going to do? I mean, that was the precursor for the invasion into Lebanon in 2006, right? That was also had something to do with the 82 invasion. As well as incursions into Gaza was about hostages. Certainly, this is the demand of the Israelis right now, are the hostages in Gaza. So what will happen if Israel sends another commando team, another special operations unit into Lebanon, and this time it doesn't go so well? What are the
what if an American warship gets hit with one of these Houthi missiles, slips through our defenses and hits a warship, or an American is killed in Iraq, or an American is killed in Syria? The list just keeps going.
You basically the every step forward escalatory, gives less options. So that ladder is just not a vertical ladder, but it's also almost like a pyramid, right? It's tapering because at least
That's a
there's less,
great analogy.
right, less
Your
rung
options are
space.
limited the higher you go.
You really are limited, and then the pressures don't go away. And it's not like, and then those who want the war, and there are those in DC, in Tel Aviv, in Lebanon, in Iran. I mean, saying last night to some folks, look, the Iranians have their versions of John Bolton and John McCain. Just, everyone has hardliners.
Lindsey Graham.
Yeah,
they got them all.
They do. And so even the threats made against, say, Lebanon, like that many Israelis, like including both the defense minister and the prime minister, have said, we will do to Beirut what we have done to Khan Yunis or to Gaza City, right? I mean, even those threats, well, for some people within Lebanon, that doesn't cause people to take a step back. That causes people to take a step forward, right? Okay, you say you're going to do this, we're going to do this then. And there are people who want to see something like that because they believe that for their own individual selves and for their institutions and their ideologies, war is the best thing. I mean, these people, I'd like to think that we had gotten to a point in history where we didn't have such people in control of institutions and societies and nations, but we do.
So let me ask you this, Matt, because right now you just painted a really accurate but distressing picture, because it's not just, I wish it was just the hotheads in Washington, the Jack Keens and the Lindsey Grahams that we could just kind of quell, but it's not. It's the Ben Gavirs, it's the Lindsey Grahams, it's the guys in Iran, it's the guys in the Yemen. All of these folks, they and head, of course, the Hassan Nasrallah, he put him in the same category. All of them are just looking about violence. Now, left to their own devices, this can only end bad for everyone. Right now, there's no way. So if you had any kind of I won't say crystal ball, but that's not even the right word either. They're predicting. If you had the power to inject into this, what is any possible way for an off-ramp for this to happen? Is it from somebody that's not even associated with any of these forces to try to inject themselves into it and bring some sanity to it? What is a possibility to off-ramp before this really goes south, that it can't be controlled?
The problem is that there's no one who has leverage over the United States except for Israel through their lobby. So the political, right? So maybe you get out of this election season and maybe the Americans are a little bit more flexible, but there is no one who has leverage over the United States. And that's the problem here. You do not. You could say, hey, could China come in? A nation like China, could Brazil? Could you have a regional effort? Where you have nations like Turkey and Egypt intervene and try and bring about some type of de-escalation, but no one has leverage over the U.S. And so the U.S. and Israel are able to thumb their nose at the world. And, for their constituencies, for, who they speak to, who they represent, that's okay. Because in their ideologies, and whether it's the American exceptionist ideology or the Fortress Israel Iron Wall ideology of Israel, it's us against the world. There's religious aspects of it that make us exceptional or make us God's chosen people. So of course, this is what religious history has taught us. Those who are chosen are always up against seemingly invincible odds, right? And so Fortress Israel, that's a manifestation of destiny, and so with that type of thinking, that type of passion, and then as well too, it's what's best for various established interests in terms of supporting Israel. Well, that means other interests may not. I'm talking at the elite level, right? So why are you seeing corporations continue to go along with this? Why are universities going along with this? Why is there not more pushback at that elite level of again, those institutions, the establishment, corporations, universities, banks, etc. Well, because those other established interests, those other elite, institutional levels, who are benefiting from this. Well, the way these things work is that, look, if those elite established institutions to your left and your right, those adjacent to you, if it's good for them, well, it's probably good for you too. So, they look, and these corporations look, and they see what's happening to the universities being dragged through the mud over this, university presidents being forced to resign. They see that there are these hedge fund managers who are all upset about it, and they're the ones leading the charge against these university presidents. And so you're your corporations, and you say, you know what? This is nothing that we need to stick our neck out on. Nobody say anything about it, and if you do, you're fired, right? And so this provides that inertia for support, right? And so, because when people like us, we look at it and we say, why? How can they go along with this? How come American Airlines is still flying to Tel Aviv? How is this possible? How are they supporting this? Well, that's the pressure that they feel they are under to continue to go along. And so your point, though, is that, who could come in and intercede? I don't know, because I don't know who has the leverage over the Americans, besides the Israeli lobby.
They don't. And that's why it is just so anguishing to me and angering that if we had some moral leadership, and not tied to cash anywhere, but somebody who actually said, we're going to do the right thing. Here's the perversion of all this, Matt, is that the very people who are funding this and who are putting pressure on not doing anything to say no to Israel are actually laying the foundation for the harm of Israel, for the harm of the Jews. They are not protecting them. They are setting the seeds, because all the rest of the world who sees this is just feeling with more and more anger. Obviously, in the region they are, and they are sowing the seeds for future conflict that nobody wants to undo, because everybody wants to use more violence. And if at this moment, right now, as we're making this tape, if we had the chance to say, all right, calm the jets here, we could slowly lower the temperature. There could be no war in Lebanon. There could be no war against Iran. There could be no more people dying in the Gaza Strip. All these things could be settled. And over time, and it would take time, then the Jewish people would also be safer long term. But that takes firm leadership right now, and no one in the United States is willing to put it. All they keep doing is trying to not make other people angry and keep the cash flowing. That's the hard truth, whether anybody wants to hear it or not. And it just angers me, because so many people are going to pay with their lives for this unwillingness to see things as they are.
This is what happens with empires and vassal states. Very often throughout history, you see examples of this where vassal states will try and do more than they should, will become greedy because they feel they have the empire's backing, right? Because we can get, so you see in the sense of what happens after the First World War, where as Jewish colonists, Jewish settlers are settling in Israel, following the Balfour Declaration, following the British government saying, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give this land to the Jewish people. They become greedy. And they want to take more because they know they have the British Empire behind them. And the same thing too in the modern era. They know they have the Americans behind them. So, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, Netanyahu and Gallant, all these people, they know ultimately the Americans are behind them and they can do what they want. Look, if you can kill 117 children a day, every day, for 104 days now, 105 days now, and they keep sending you bombs, you can do whatever you want. And they know that.
Yeah, and that is the truth.
Even though, as you so importantly point out, Danny, this not in the long term, in the midterm. And, in a few years, the consequences of this for Israel are going to be drastic. Strategically, this is so insipid. This is so dumb. But in the short term, politically, this is what's best, for both the Israelis in power and for the Americans in power.
Yeah, that's just how it is.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, thanks for laying this out in a rather succinct way. We are going to continue to follow this, and we're going to continue calling out things as they are. I don't care if anybody likes it or not. These are the realities. We care so much about the Jewish people. We care about the Palestinian people. We care about all of the individuals, the civilians in this entire region and in America, and for Americans who could get drawn into a war. And all we're going to do is continue to call out the truth and just pray to God that at some point somebody with power stands up and does the right thing. But until then, we're going to continue having you on and sharing your views, because we're very grateful to have it.
All right. Thanks, Danny.
All right. And we thank you guys too. We've got some more shows coming up later this afternoon. You won't want to miss those because we are going to continue to be just like this, unintimidated and uncompromised on bringing you the truth so that you can make sense of your world around you and hold people accountable by saying stuff like this. So you see before it happens, when it does happen, then people need to be held accountable so that it doesn't happen again in the future. That's what we're trying to do here. Because ultimately, folks, we're in this together. We're on your side. Thanks, and we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.